Story disclaimer. This story is a work of fiction and is intended for entertainment purposes only. The content includes dark themes, horror elements, and fictional depictions of rituals and sacrifices that are purely imaginative and not reflective of any real-life practices or beliefs. Viewer discretion is advised. This video is not suitable for younger audiences, and parental guidance is recommended. The story does not endorse or promote any harmful behavior, violence, or dangerous activities. Please note that all characters, events, and settings are entirely fictional and created for the purpose of storytelling. Any resemblance to actual persons, living or dead, or actual events, is purely coincidental. Step into the shadowy world of Kisa in The Banker's Secret, a gripping tale of ambition, danger, and betrayal. Meet Kofi, a young cashier at a city bank who's intrigued by a mysterious man in a black suit who deposits vast sums of money every week. When Kofi dares to question him, he's invited to a lavish dinner that unveils a hidden world of power and peril. Discover the dark allure of a secretive cult led by the enigmatic man who offers Kofi a chance at unimaginable wealth in exchange for his loyalty. The initiation. A dangerous and morally compromising task that could change Kofi's life forever. But as he dives deeper, he uncovers a web of deceit and manipulation that traps him in a nightmarish game with high stakes. With each chapter packed with jaw-dropping twists and turns, dark cult initiation will keep you guessing and gripping your seat. As Kofi faces unimaginable challenges and confronts dark truths, you'll be on the edge of your seat, craving each new revelation. Hit subscribe and join the journey through a world where nothing is as it seems and every choice could be your last. Chapter 1: The Mysterious Depositor. Kofi worked as a cashier in the bustling city of Kisa, a place where skyscrapers reached for the skies, and the streets buzzed with the sounds of busy markets and honking cars. Every day felt the same, counting bills, stamping papers, and nodding politely to customers. But there was one thing that always stood out: the man in the black suit. Every Monday, without fail, the man would stroll into the bank with an air of quiet authority. He wore a perfectly tailored black suit, polished shoes that glinted under the bank's fluorescent lights, and dark sunglasses that never revealed his eyes. He never smiled, never chatted, and never broke his routine. The man would step up to Kofi's counter, slide a heavy briefcase across the desk, and say the same thing each time: "Deposit, please." The briefcases were always stuffed with crisp bills, enough to make Kofi's hands tremble as he counted. He never saw so much money at once, and every time the amount seemed to grow larger. Kofi's colleagues would exchange curious glances, but nobody dared to ask. It was as if the man's presence silenced the air around him, commanding respect and fear in equal measure. Kofi couldn't help but wonder, where did the man get all that money? What did he do for a living? The mystery gnawed at him week after week, growing stronger with every silent transaction. And so, one Monday, as Kofi's curiosity finally bubbled over, he decided to break the silence. "Excuse me, sir," Kofi said, trying to sound casual as he handed back the receipt. "You must have an interesting job, bringing in this much money every week." The man paused, his hand frozen mid-reach for the receipt. Behind the dark sunglasses, Kofi felt the man's eyes lock onto him, piercing through the lenses. Kofi swallowed hard, regretting his boldness. But then, the man did something unexpected. He smirked. "You're curious," the man said, his voice smooth like silk but carrying a hidden edge. "Not many people have the guts to ask." Kofi tried to smile, though his heart raced. "I guess so." The man leaned in closer, lowering his voice. "I'm having dinner tonight at my place. If you're that curious, you should come. We'll talk." Kofi's mind spun. A dinner invitation? From the mysterious man in black? His instincts told him to say no, but the lure of answers was too strong to ignore. "I'll be there," Kofi blurted before he could change his mind. The man nodded, handing Kofi a card with an address on it. Without another word, he turned and left the bank, his presence fading as suddenly as it had arrived. Kofi stared at the card, his pulse quickening. The address was unfamiliar, but the promise of uncovering the man's secret was too enticing to resist. As Kofi clocked out that evening, he couldn't shake the feeling that his life was about to change. Little did he know, he was about to step into a world far darker and more dangerous than he ever imagined. Kofi's hands shook as he gripped the steering wheel, following the winding roads that led him far from the heart of Kisa. The address on the card took him through quiet neighborhoods, where houses grew larger and more lavish with each turn. By the time he reached the gates of the mansion, Kofi felt like he had stepped into another world, a world of wealth and power that he had only glimpsed from behind the counter of his modest bank job. The mansion was enormous, perched on a hill and surrounded by tall, ancient trees that cast long shadows over the manicured lawns. A stone path lined with ornate statues led up to the front door, which was flanked by towering pillars. Kofi parked his car, feeling as though he was trespassing on sacred ground. The house loomed above him, dark and foreboding, its windows like empty eyes watching his every move. The door swung open before Kofi could knock, and there stood Mr. Mosigo, still dressed in his signature black suit but without the sunglasses this time. His eyes were sharp, assessing Kofi with an intensity that made him feel exposed. "Welcome, Kofi," Mr. Mosigo said, his voice echoing in the grand entrance hall. "Come in." Kofi stepped inside, and his breath caught. The mansion's interior was even more extravagant than he'd imagined, marble floors, chandeliers that sparkled like stars, and walls adorned with expensive art that whispered of old money and untold secrets. He followed Mr. Mosigo through the winding corridors, past rooms filled with antique furniture and strange, unsettling sculptures that seemed to watch them pass. They arrived in a vast dining room, where a long table was set with the finest silverware and plates that gleamed under the soft glow of candlelight. Everything was perfect, down to the last detail, yet there was an air of unease that clung to the place, the heaviness that made Kofi's skin prickle. They sat down, and a silent waiter appeared, serving dishes that Kofi couldn't even name, exotic, richly spiced foods that melted in his mouth. But no matter how luxurious the meal, Kofi couldn't shake the feeling that he was being fattened up for something sinister. After dinner, Mr. Mosigo leaned back in his chair, studying Kofi with a faint smile. "You want to know where the money comes from," he said, his tone casual but laced with something darker. "The truth is, Kofi, that wealth, real wealth, never comes from hard work alone. It comes from understanding power and how to use it." Kofi nodded, unsure of where the conversation was headed. Mr. Mosigo continued, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "I lead a group, some might call it a cult, but we see it as a society. A brotherhood that taps into the hidden forces of the world, bending them to our will. We have influence, power, and, of course, wealth beyond imagination. But it requires dedication, and the willingness to do things others wouldn't dare." Kofi's heart pounded. "What do you mean by, things others wouldn't dare?" Mr. Mosigo smiled, leaning in closer. "The initiation isn't easy. But if you succeed, you'll be rewarded handsomely. You see, our wealth is built on secrets, and secrets must be guarded, protected, even expanded." He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. "Your task will be simple at first: recruit 5 rich, single women every day. Get close to them and bring them into the fold. Each one is a gateway to greater power and wealth." Kofi's mind reeled. The proposition was outrageous, dangerous, and utterly immoral. But as he glanced around the opulent room, the allure of Mr. Mosigo's promises tugged at him. Wealth beyond his wildest dreams, power to change his life, how could he refuse? Yet, beneath the surface of Mr. Mosigo's offer, Kofi sensed an undercurrent of danger. He had already stepped too far into a world he didn't understand, and he was starting to realize that there was no easy way out. Kofi left the mansion with Mr. Mosigo's words echoing in his ears. The drive back home felt surreal, the city's lights blurring into a haze as his mind raced. Could he really go through with it? The promise of wealth was tempting, but the cost seemed too high. Yet, the thought of returning to his mundane life at the bank, counting bills and living paycheck to paycheck, gnawed at him. By the time he reached his small apartment, Kofi had made up his mind. He couldn't ignore the opportunity. It was his ticket out of the ordinary, the chance to rewrite his life. But as he lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling, a sense of dread settled over him. What had he agreed to? The next day, Kofi returned to work, but the bank felt different. The familiar faces and routines seemed distant, irrelevant. All he could think about was Mr. Masego's offer, the mansion, the cult. His curiosity had led him into something far darker than he'd anticipated, and now there was no turning back. That evening, Kofi received a text from an unknown number, "Meet me at the Grand Hotel tonight. Room 509. Your first assignment awaits." Kofi's pulse quickened. He knew the Grand Hotel. It was one of the city's most exclusive spots, a place where the wealthy and powerful gathered. Kofi dressed in his best suit, feeling a mix of excitement and fear. He arrived at the hotel, his heart thudding in his chest as he rode the elevator up to the 5th floor. Room 509 was at the end of a long, dimly lit corridor. Kofi hesitated at the door, his hand trembling as he reached for the handle. Inside, he found a lavish room filled with candles and a heavy scent of incense. A woman stood by the window, her silhouette outlined against the city lights. She turned as Kofi entered, her eyes locking onto his with an intensity that sent a shiver down his spine. "Are you the one?" she asked, her voice smooth but edged with suspicion. Kofi nodded, swallowing hard. He introduced himself, trying to sound confident. The woman was beautiful, dressed in a sleek black dress that clung to her like a shadow. But there was something off, her gaze was too sharp, too knowing. As they talked, Kofi realized that this was no ordinary recruitment. The woman, Ms. Adoma, was sharp, inquisitive, and seemed to already know about the cult. She spoke in cryptic phrases, hinting at things that made Kofi's skin crawl. The room felt charged, like a storm about to break. And then, just as Kofi thought he was making progress, Ms. Adoma's demeanor changed. She leaned in, her voice dropping to a whisper. "You think you're in control, don't you? That this is your choice. But you have no idea what you've walked into." Before Kofi could respond, Ms. Adoma pulled out a small, ornate mirror from her purse, holding it up between them. The mirror glinted in the candlelight, casting eerie reflections on the walls. Kofi's breath caught in his throat. "You're not the first," she said, her eyes boring into his. "And you won't be the last. You've made a pact, and now there's no way out." Kofi stumbled back, his mind reeling. He had thought he was the one making the choices, but now it seemed as if he was just a pawn in a much larger, more dangerous game. The room seemed to close in around him, the shadows growing darker and more menacing. Kofi bolted from the room, his heart racing as he fled down the hallway. The truth was starting to become clear, the cult wasn't just about wealth, it was about control, manipulation, and power. And Kofi was in way over his head. Kofi rushed out of the Grand Hotel, his thoughts a whirlwind of fear and confusion. The chill of the night air hit him as he ran through the bustling streets of Kisa, the city's bright lights blaring past. He had always dreamed of escaping the monotony of his life, but now he found himself tangled in something far darker and more dangerous than he had ever imagined. By the time Kofi reached his apartment, his phone buzzed. He fumbled it out of his pocket, his heart sinking as he saw the message, "You're in deep now, Kofi. There's no turning back. Meet me tomorrow night. Same place." The text wasn't from Mr. Mosigo, it was from Ms. Adoma. Kofi's skin prickled. What was her role in all of this? And why did she seem to know so much? The cryptic warnings and the dagger, it was as if she was testing him, pushing him to see how far he would go. The next day, Kofi couldn't concentrate at the bank. His hands shook as he handled the cash, and his eyes kept darting to the door, half expecting Ms. Adoma or Mr. Mosigo to walk in. By evening, he was a bundle of nerves, questioning every decision that had led him to this point. He knew he couldn't trust the cult, but the lure of wealth and power was too strong to ignore. Later that night, he returned to the Grand Hotel, his heart pounding with each step down the corridor to room 509. This time, the door was slightly ajar. Kofi hesitated, listening to the muffled voices inside. He pushed the door open slowly, peeking in to see Ms. Adoma sitting at the table, talking to Mr. Mosigo. They hadn't noticed him yet. "He's not ready," Ms. Adoma was saying, her voice tense. "You're rushing this. He's too naive, too green." Mr. Mosigo leaned back, a cold smile on his lips. "He doesn't have to be ready. He just has to be desperate enough. The rest will come." Kofi's blood ran cold. They were talking about him, as if he were nothing more than a pawn. He had been so blinded by the promise of wealth that he hadn't realized how little control he actually had. Suddenly, the weight of his decision pressed down on him. He needed a way out. Kofi stepped into the room, trying to mask his anxiety with a forced smile. Both Ms. Adoma and Mr. Mosigo turned to him, their expressions unreadable. "Good, you're here," Mr. Mosigo said, motioning for Kofi to sit. "We were just discussing your next steps." Kofi took a seat, keeping his distance from both of them. The tension in the room was palpable, like a coiled spring ready to snap. Mr. Mosigo laid out the plan, a gala event filled with the city's elite, his chance to recruit new members. But Kofi couldn't shake the feeling that this was another test, the trap set to see how far he would go. As the night unfolded, the plan went awry. Kofi was mingling with the wealthy guests, trying to charm his way into their circles, when he spotted Ms. Adoma speaking intently with a group of men in the corner. They were dressed in dark suits, similar to Mr. Mosego's, but there was something off about them, their eyes cold and predatory. Kofi strained to hear their conversation, his ears catching snippets of words that sent a chill down his spine. "He's the one of the men said, his voice low. "Mosigo thinks he can control him, but he's too weak." Ms. Adoma glanced over, catching Kofi's eye. For a split second, her expression softened, a flicker of something that looked almost like pity. But it was gone as quickly as it came, replaced by her usual inscrutable mask. She turned back to the men, her voice lowering again. Kofi felt a surge of panic. Was she setting him up? Or was she warning him? As Kofi moved closer, he stumbled upon something even more disturbing, a hidden room behind a thick velvet curtain at the edge of the ballroom. The door was ajar, revealing a chilling sight, a large table covered with strange symbols and photographs. Kofi's breath caught when he realized the photos were of him, snapshots of his every move, from the bank to his apartment, even the first meeting with Mr. Mosigo. His hands shook as he picked up a photo showing him leaving the Grand Hotel the night before. There was another of him at the bank, counting bills with a vacant expression. But the most disturbing was a recent shot of him standing outside his own apartment, looking lost and vulnerable. They had been watching him all along. Kofi backed away, his mind reeling. Every step he had taken, every choice he thought he made, had been orchestrated by Mr. Mosigo. He wasn't a player in this game, he was the prey. The realization hit him like a punch to the gut. He needed to get out, but how? The walls seemed to close in on him, the weight of his entanglement with the cult pressing down like a vice. He bolted from the hidden room, nearly colliding with Ms. Adoma. She grabbed his arm, her grip surprisingly strong. "You need to leave now," she hissed, her eyes darting around nervously. Kofi pulled away, confusion and fear roiling inside him. What is this? Why are they watching me? Ms. Adoma didn't answer, instead she shoved a small envelope into his hand. Go home and read this. But remember, you can't trust anyone, not even me. Kofi didn't wait for more. He pushed through the crowd, his heart racing as he fled the gala. Once outside, he tore open the envelope. Inside was a single sheet of paper with a list of names, people he recognized from the bank, from the city. But at the very bottom, his own name stood out, circled in red. He stumbled back, the weight of it all crashing down. The cult's reach was everywhere, and now he was marked. He wasn't just part of their plan, he was at the center of it, caught in a web that was tightening with every passing moment. Kofi knew he was in a game far beyond his control, and the stakes were higher than he had ever imagined. Kofi couldn't sleep. The faces from the photos haunted him, and the list of names burned in his mind. What did they want from him? And why was his name on that list? Each question spiraled into another, deeper and darker, until Kofi could barely breathe from the weight of it all. The next morning, Kofi went to work, but everything felt wrong. The bank seemed different, the customers distant and strange. His colleagues, who once felt like friends, now seemed like strangers. Kofi couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched, that every movement was being scrutinized. He glanced nervously at the security cameras, wondering if they were part of the cult's surveillance. Around noon, Mr. Mosigo appeared at Kofi's counter, his expression unreadable. Kofi tensed, forcing a smile as he greeted him. Mr. Mosigo nodded, sliding a small, plain envelope across the counter. Open it later, Mr. Mosigo said in a low voice. It's your next task. Don't disappoint me, Kofi. With that, he turned and left, his presence lingering like a dark cloud over the bank. Kofi pocketed the envelope, feeling its weight like a stone. He finished his shift in a daze, barely aware of the customers or the transactions. All he could think about was the envelope and the secrets it held. As soon as his shift ended, Kofi hurried home and tore open the envelope. Inside was a single slip of paper with another list of names, but this time it was different. Each name was paired with an address and a time. At the bottom of the list was a chilling instruction: collect tonight. No exceptions. Kofi's heart pounded. Collect what? Or who? He didn't want to find out, but he knew he didn't have a choice. He was trapped, and the only way out was forward. That night, Kofi found himself driving through the darkened streets of Kisa, following the addresses on the list. The first location was a quiet, upscale neighborhood. He parked outside a grand house and hesitated, staring up at the imposing facade. He felt sick, his mind racing with dread. He was supposed to collect something, but what if it was more than he could handle? He approached the house cautiously, his footsteps echoing in the silence. The door creaked open as if expecting him, when Kofi stepped inside. The house was eerily quiet, with dim lights casting long shadows on the walls. Kofi moved through the rooms, his heart thudding in his chest. Finally, he found what he was looking for, a briefcase, sitting on a table in the center of a large, empty room. Kofi grabbed the briefcase, the weight of it heavy in his hand. But as he turned to leave, he heard a soft noise, a whisper, barely audible. He froze, his blood running cold. He wasn't alone. From the shadows, a figure emerged, a young woman, her eyes wide with fear. She looked at Kofi, then at the briefcase, and her expression shifted from fear to anger. "You're one of them, aren't you?" she spat, her voice trembling. "You're part of this sick game." Kofi shook his head, backing away. "I'm not, I don't even know what's going on. I'm just trying to get out." The woman's eyes narrowed, and she took a step forward. "They'll never let you go. You think you're different, but you're just like them. You're just another pawn." Kofi felt a surge of panic. He didn't know who she was or how she was involved, but he knew he couldn't stay. He turned and ran, the woman's voice echoing behind him. As he drove away, the weight of the briefcase pressed against his leg, a grim reminder of the impossible situation he was in. When Kofi returned to his apartment, he opened the briefcase with shaking hands. Inside, he found stacks of cash, a small black book filled with names and dates, and a small, ornate mirror, another test, another piece of the puzzle that he couldn't put together. He knew one thing for certain: the cult was far more dangerous than he had imagined, and he was in deeper than he could have ever anticipated. He was no longer just a player, he was a key piece in a game of shadows and secrets, and the only way out was to keep playing. But Kofi couldn't shake the feeling that he was being set up for something far worse. The faces on the photos, the names on the lists, they weren't just targets. They were targets, and Kofi was being groomed to be the next executioner. He stared at the mirror, its glinting in the dim light, and felt a cold dread settle in his bones. He was trapped in a nightmare, and the deeper he went, the harder it was to see a way out. As Kofi closed the briefcase, he knew that the real danger wasn't the cult, it was the realization that he was losing himself to it, becoming the very thing he feared most. The city of Kisa was no longer just a backdrop to his life, it was a labyrinth of shadows, secrets, and betrayals. And Kofi was lost in the middle of it, with no map, no guide, and no escape. Kofi couldn't shake the image of the woman from the mansion or her haunting words, "You're just another pawn." It played in his mind on a loop, each repetition stoking his fear and paranoia. The black book from the briefcase lay open on his coffee table, its pages filled with names, cryptic symbols, and unsettling sketches. Some of the names were familiar: city officials, prominent business people, even a few celebrities. Kofi realized with growing horror that these were not just random targets, they were the power brokers of Kisa. The cult wasn't just amassing wealth, it was positioning itself to control the entire city. His phone buzzed, breaking his thoughts. It was another message from Mr. Mosigo: "Tomorrow night. You'll be ready." The words sent a chill down his spine. Ready for what? The ambiguity made it all the more terrifying. Kofi spent the day researching the names in the black book. The deeper he dug, the more connections he found, webs of influence that linked politicians to shady businesses and crime syndicates. Every thread led back to the cult, but there was something else, something even more disturbing: a pattern of disappearances. People whose names appeared in the book had vanished without a trace, their wealth transferred to offshore accounts controlled by unknown entities. Kofi's heart pounded as he pieced it together. The cult wasn't just recruiting, they were eliminating anyone who posed a threat or refused to comply. And now, he was part of their next move. That night, Kofi received an unexpected call. It was Ms. Adoma. Her voice was low and urgent. "Kofi, you need to get out of the city. They know you're digging too deep." Kofi's pulse quickened. "What do you mean? Who are they?" "The elders," she whispered, her voice trembling. "They control everything: the cult, the city, even Mr. Mosigo. You're just a pawn in their game, but they're starting to see you as a threat." Kofi's mind raced. The elders were a shadowy figurehead in the cult, rarely seen and never spoken of directly. If they were aware of him, he was in more danger than he realized. But Kofi couldn't leave now. He needed answers, and the only way to get them was to confront Mr. Mosigo directly. The next night, Kofi arrived at the Grand Hotel, his resolve hardened. As he walked through the ornate lobby, he felt every eye on him, every whisper amplified in his ears. Room 509 loomed at the end of the hallway, its door ominously closed. Kofi steeled himself and knocked. Mr. Mosigo opened the door, his face a mask of calm. But Kofi could sense the tension simmering beneath the surface. The room was dimly lit, a single lamp casting shadows on the walls. On the table lay another briefcase, but this one was open, revealing stacks of documents and a handgun. Kofi's heart latched. "You're late," Mr. Mosigo said coldly, motioning for Kofi to sit. "We have much to discuss." Kofi sat down, trying to steady his nerves. "I'm done following orders without knowing what's really going on. I want out." Mr. Mosigo laughed softly, a sound devoid of warmth. "Out? You think you can just walk away? You've already crossed the line, Kofi. There's no turning back now." Kofi clenched his fists under the table, his mind racing for a way out. "What do you want from me?" Mr. Mosego's eyes gleamed in the dim light. "Your loyalty. Your complete and unquestioning loyalty. And in return, you get everything you've ever dreamed of: power, wealth, respect. But first, you must prove yourself." He slid a file across the table. Kofi opened it, his stomach churning as he saw the photographs inside. They were of the woman from the mansion, the one who had warned him. Her face was bruised, her expression defiant even in her distress. The final photo showed her very unhappy, sat on a chair in a dark room. Kofi's vision blurred with rage and fear. "What is this? She betrayed us," Mr. Mosigo said casually, as if discussing the weather. "Your task is simple: discipline her." Kofi recoiled, pushing the file away. "No. I'm not disciplining her." Mr. Mosego's expression hardened. "You're whatever we need you to be. Remember, Kofi, we own you. If you refuse, you're not just pushing her, you are punishing yourself." Kofi's mind raced. He felt trapped, the walls closing in around him. He needed to get out of there, but he also needed to save the woman. She was the only one who had tried to help him, and now she was paying the price. In a split-second decision, Kofi lunged across the table, grabbing a jar full of marbles before Mr. Mosigo could react. The room exploded into chaos as Kofi threw the marbles into the ceiling, sending Mr. Mosigo diving for cover. "Let her go," Kofi demanded, his voice shaking. "Or I swear I locked you in room this right now." Mr. Mosigo stared at him, a flicker of genuine surprise crossing his face. For a moment, it seemed as if he might comply, but then his expression shifted, a cruel smile spreading across his lips. "You have no idea what you're dealing with, Kofi," he said calmly. "Even if you lock me in a room forever, there are others. The elders will never let you go. You're already marked." Kofi hesitated, the weight of the marbles heavy in his hand. He knew Mr. Mosigo was right. Even if he escaped tonight, the cult's reach extended far beyond anything he could imagine. But he also knew he couldn't continue playing their game. He had to take control, even if it meant risking everything. He backed toward the door, keeping the marbles trained on Mr. Mosigo. "This isn't over," Kofi said, his voice firm. "I'm going to find her, and I'm going to end this." With that, he bolted from the room, adrenaline propelling him down the corridor and out into the night. The city of Kisa spread out before him, its bright lights a stark contrast to the darkness that now consumed his life. Kofi knew he was running out of time, and the cult would stop at nothing to reel him back in. Will Kofi manage to escape the cult, or are they going to reel him back in? Find out in the next episode.